This is Sonic Ventures, a podcast celebrating the concept album format with Robert Goebel and Joël Tibbetts.
Sonic Ventures is an evolving series of discussions that explore concept albums from a variety of artists and genres. Our intent here is to have celebratory conversations of our personal experiences with selected works and the issues and themes surrounding concept albums.
Sometimes, we will be treading familiar waters concerning music interpretation and creation. Other times, we will venture into different places of thought, emotion, and expression. We invite you to join us on our sonic venture. Ep.2, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. This conversation was recorded on July 30th, 2021. This is Joël, and this conversation was actually our first conversation as a part of this endeavor, part of this podcast. We chose to go ahead and jump into the deep end of the pool, as it were, to not only talk about an album that means a lot to both of us, and to talk about an album that is usually considered to be one of the most revered concept albums made to date, but also to get us just going into the process of this very directly by talking about an album and really seeing where we end up at the end of this conversation through the process to kind of set not only the tone for this season that we're doing, but also for us to start getting a sense of how these conversations will evolve between us. So apart from that, what I found really valuable about this conversation was my own process of considering the album, Dark Side of the Moon, in preparation for the discussion. And I had two very profound insights, one of which in particular comes up in the conversation. And so I was really grateful for that experience for myself. But the other part of this conversation that was very significant for me was to see how in the conversation, new things arise. Because when you're talking about music, people will often say that it's a very abstract thing. So we end up using a lot of analogy, a lot of metaphors to talk about music, because language, at least for me, can't really get into what is happening in the music. It stands for itself. So going through this process of talking about Dark Side of the Moon was great for me to see how the value of having these conversations is what arises within them. The things that you don't expect, the things that surprise you. And certainly you may not be able to really come to the end of it and say, this is what it is. But you can say, wow, look at what happened. So here's our conversation about Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Thanks for listening. I wanted to ask you about your first time that you heard Dark Side of the Moon.
Right.
So when was that and how was that?
So I've thought about this, and I can answer that in two ways. There is the first time I was aware of the dark side of the moon, as it was a thing that existed,
right?
And then, which is different than the first time I heard something from Dark Side of the Moon that say wasn't money,
Yeah.
If you listen to radio in the 70s,
Yeah.
in particular, and even in the 80s, early 80s, you would regularly hear Money on the playlist. Like Money was a song that was played. So
Yeah.
Everyone kind of knew Money as a song, and but you didn't necessarily know the other songs, right?
Right.
That was one that could be played sort of on its own. But my awareness of Dark Side of the Moon as a thing unto itself really came again from radio, and the radio commercials talking about Laser Floyd.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The planetarium. We have a planetarium here in Vancouver, and it would either be Laser Floyd or Laser Zeppelin being advertised, some event where they would be playing Dark Side of the Moon or Zeppelin 4 or something down at the planetarium. And as a young person who was definitely living in the suburbs, which is its own thing, what I imagined was happening at the planetarium in like 1978 or 1979 for Laser Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, was this, I had already built this experience up that Dark Side of the Moon was this thing that, that was trippy in some way.
Yeah.
That you went down to watch it. Maybe you imbibed in some mind altering substance, whatever teenagers were doing, and and because I would have been maybe 9, sort of when I became more aware of that 9 or 10, and that whatever it was a journey, it was a trip, maybe literally and figuratively both, and it was, something adult, but different, something very specific and different than just music.
Right.
And, but the first time I heard Time was on a CFOX countdown, 99 greatest guitar songs, guitar focused songs, maybe somewhere around 1980, somewhere in there. And, Time was the song. So, it starts off with the clocks and right away, that's like adult. Very like clocks. That's very adult. That's very sophisticated stuff. Maybe 10 or 11 at that point, and then Time, and the guitar in Time, which was only just, if you had to pick a song that would sort of captured the trip that I imagined Dark Side of the Moon was, that certainly fit there for me. And so there was that experience of the guitar and the focus of the guitar and just the sort of sonic trip that was unto itself, and then from there it was run out and buy the cassette.
Right.
So shortly thereafter, my Dark Side of the Moon was putting the headphones on and queuing up the cassette and side 1, side 2, and listening to it as in its entirety, as we often did as young people back then. You had only so many cassettes.
Yes.
Right. And you
loved them.
You loved them, and you had time, and that's what you were actively doing at the time. So, very shortly after hearing Time, I was inspired enough to go and purchase the cassette. And Dark Side of the Moon was that experience, putting on the headphones and just playing and hearing this and experiencing this trip, this journey. And so being able to have the time as a young person to put the headphones on and self-isolate and just take that journey. I had that kind of time. My parents allowed me lots of space, especially as it related to music stuff. So there was that trip with these headphones on. And, I knew I was in a different place. I knew I had leveled up in my adultness or my, like something had happened there. There were so many elements that surprised me as a young person that seemed, that there was a foreignness, because it was British. that came, so that I was getting sort of tapping into a journey that other people had already taken, that I was witnessing, because here it was already on tape.
Yeah.
But I was experiencing it as I took the journey. So it was, I was very aware of those sort of, that I'm taking a journey, but I'm listening to a journey that someone's already taken.
Right.
And there's a commonality of a journey that I know my friend may have taken or not taken yet.
Right.
Which, so, and from very first listen, I was very aware of those things. So it had a layered experiential element to it, to me as a young person, which would have been around at that point 10 or 11 for that, that experience. And I've, I still very much remember those feelings. It was, it was definitely there was a point of demarcation, in the node of my growing up that came from buying that album and having that album. So,
Wow.
it was one of those, there are a few albums that we have, I'm sure, in our histories where we can have similar sort of awarenesses of.
Yeah.
But that one was one of them for me. And then occasionally you would hear the lazy DJ at night. Tonight it's side one of,
Yes,
whatever was going on in the station. Who knew?
Right.
So when I heard it outside of my own journey, it was often either it was almost always at night.
Yeah.
Right. It was always an evening journey.
Right.
And which changed the nature of the journey, I think. And it was often one side or the other.
Right.
It wasn't it wasn't always complete.
Yeah, there were stations that used to do B-side nights as well. That they would do that at night, where you get to go supposedly deeper.
Yeah.
Although you already know the album.
Right.
But because we're playing it from the station at night, it's deeper.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, you hear, culturally, we've heard references that those were just so the DJs could go smoke weed around the back and not have to come back to the mixer for like 20 minutes,
Right.
or whatever was going on in radio back in those days.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's all a mystery.
It's
to me.
it's a big mystery.
I was just on the other side of the glass
That's
for that. Yeah. Well, for me, Dark Side of the Moon literally came on the back of another album.
okay.
So when I
This is interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. So, this was just before I started playing guitar.
Okay.
Like just before, so I'd already been playing. So I was 12.
Yeah.
I'd already been playing music, saxophone and piano and that. And a friend of my dad made my dad a mixtape on one of those extended length cassettes. And because my dad wanted a copy of Brothers in Arms,
Okay.
because it came out in 85, and my dad and I, my brother, if I remember right, we loved, Brothers in Arms. It was great. The singles were great. My dad wanted a copy. I don't know why he didn't want to buy it, but my friend made him a tape. Mm-hmm. It was extended tape. So of course it got a lot of play. And then one day I went to where we had the amplifier and the cassette deck and all that, and I wanted to listen to Brothers in Arms on my own. Put the headphones on, have a journey.
Yeah.
So I put it on and I played through it, and I popped out the cassette when it was done, and I happened to turn it over, and for the first time ever I noticed that on the back it said Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. I had no idea what that was. What the hell? Who is Pink Floyd? Who is Pink Floyd? Who is this pink person? So I thought, well, I could rewind the tape, or I could listen to what's Pink Floyd and what's Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah.
So I started playing it. And the first things I heard, I thought, I don't even know what to make of this. But I had already had something of an experience with ambient sounds on records and that, because I like to listen to radio plays when I was a kid, like the old Lone Ranger radio plays.
Yeah, I get it, yeah.
So it wasn't too weird, but I didn't know where this was going. And I remember sitting through almost all of it. And I don't know why I didn't listen to all of it. But it did make an impression on me. But I didn't know what to make of that impression. And then, a year went by. And at this point, I was interacting with people who were older than me. And one day I saw someone walking around who had this T-shirt, and it had Pink Floyd on it. And I thought, oh, okay, what is this? So it was like I didn't know how to localize these sounds I'd heard. I didn't know where they came from, who made them, why they made them. And seeing that name on a T-shirt by someone who's in my peer group, I thought, okay, I got to know more about this. And then I asked the question, what is Pink Floyd? And immediately the response was, oh man, get away from me. Oh, okay. So very quickly after that, I found out who David Gilmour was, and guitar player, I have to know this.
Yeah.
And I thought, I have Pink Floyd at home. And then I listened to it again, and for some reason, that second listen, it just got the hook in me.
Wow.
It's like, wow, this is amazing. But I think lyrically, I couldn't quite get there with it yet.
Yeah.
But musically, I found it so fascinating. Because up in that time, earlier in my life, my dad had bought me a portable cassette player, and I would make my own radio plays, and I'd run around recording sounds. So I had a very dynamic, I think at an early age, concept of working with sound and music.
Right, of sound capture.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
And so something like all the stuff that's on Dark Side of the Moon, it's not all that far-fetched.
No.
But I couldn't really go deep into it in the symbolism yet.
Yeah.
But that first time I listened to it, it was like kind of like an accident.
Yeah.
And I don't even think my dad, I'm pretty sure that my dad didn't ask for Dark Side of the Moon. I think my friend you need to listen to this.
Yeah.
So, and why waste the good side of a tape?
Right.
So put something good on it. And he did. And so that when I think back to listen to Dark Side of the Moon the first time is I remember the hook coming in, but I had no idea what it was.
Yeah.
It was just something was captivating about it at the time that I still to this day could not put my finger on.
Yeah.
But it was enough for me to remember the name, and it was enough for me to go chase after it when it suddenly had a tangibility, right, beyond it just being the music.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was very intriguing, and then also right into that, because by that time when I was playing guitar, I was so obsessed with technique. Right away, I remember being very obsessed with technique. But to hear Gilmour's playing, and it's so lyrical, it's so emotive,
and dynamic,
and
as well.
dynamic,
Yeah.
and dynamic. It immediately brought in the challenge to, okay, no, virtuosity is interesting, but can you speak?
Right.
And so that was my first experience.
Wow.
Of Pink Floyd.
I love that the found album on the backside of another album. That's
The other beauty that we've lost of mixed tapes
true.
is these discoveries.
Yeah, and that's not an uncommon kind of discovery for mixtapes back in the day, because there was often, why you were made a mixtape or requested a mixtape was usually either to get specifically an album, but usually more specifically a song or a couple of songs from a band or a style of music that whatever your buddy was touting or whatever was exciting you in the moment, you would get that. But there was then always that question of, what do you put on the rest of the space, right? Because you wouldn't leave it blank, right? So
it was very wasteful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Why? There's another half hour on this thing or more.
Yeah.
I gotta put something on here.
Well, I'll have to say I've made many mixtapes, and going back, depending upon when I made them, it was very common for me to fill the remainder with either moving pictures or some, there was usually one or two albums that specifically got tagged on to the end of something.
It was a no-brainer.
It was kind of a no-brainer. So I don't have them with me right now. They're in storage, but I have.
You still have them?
All my original cassettes as well as all my original mixtapes. So I probably got maybe 1,200, maybe, and that are in cassette format. So I'll have that original Pink Floyd cassette still, and I'll have those mixtapes with side 2 of Moving Pictures or side 1 of Moving Pictures, or played out until the cutoff. So you're always missing a song. So when you say I don't know if I listened to the full thing. And I don't know why. It's like, well, I probably know why. We could probably check the runtime and go, at 44 minutes.
It was all there.
Yeah, okay, well, that's good.
It was an extended tape.
Right.
So, both sides were 45 minutes.
Okay, yeah, so both sides 90. So a 90.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was all there. I just don't remember why I stopped prematurely.
Okay.
Maybe I went to sleep.
Well,
I don't quite remember
possible.
that part. I just really remember how it was written on the tape. Pink Floyd - Dark Side of the Moon.
Right. So it's in a way it's a Rosetta Stone, or it's like the hieroglyphs in the in the
really
pyramid.
Felt like that way.
Yeah.
Like it felt like, wow, what is it? And then even that artwork, right? It wasn't. It was the T-shirt was for the wall.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It wasn't the Dark Side of the Moon. And it was very colorful. And just.
Is it possible that cassette is around?
It's very possible.
Yeah.
It's very possible. But
that would be a good photo to get.
I don't think we should stop right now to go find it.
No. Yeah. Stop everything.
We have to find this cassette.
Yeah.
So what is for you the things that stand out right now with Dark Side of the Moon?
For me, I talked about my sort of entry into Dark Side was through time and time being presented as one of the greatest guitar tracks of all time.
Right.
So there was that element of listening and focusing on the guitar of that. But it's there, right? When you listen to it. But for me, the experience of Dark Side as an album, and where I fell in love with it was the song After Time, which was the Great Gig in the Sky,
Great Gig
right?
in the Sky, yeah.
And the reprise of Breathe that sort of transitions. I mean, you can call that part of time, or you can call it the reprise of Breathe, but the emotiveness of that section of music, and me being a guitar player and loving what Gilmour was doing, but then being captured by that section, but like that for me, what I experience in that as a listener every time I listen to it is this. There's an emotional journey there, and an expression and an emotional expressiveness that I undertake sort of in parallel with the music. That it hooks me and takes me. It takes me to the church, right? And I know it was important for us, in these discussions when we talked about doing them, is not to try and necessarily, all the technical and the scholarship on Dark Side, has been done. There's tons of it out there. Yeah. So I'm I don't want to pull too much of that out of the pocket to kind of, sort of lay down, because a lot of people have explored that. But my understanding of a lot of the album is the song titles were done after, after the recording, and that section was just called the religious section. And that to me makes a lot of sense. Not just in the stereotypical way, but just that the experience of that for me in that is this emotional journey that has me rising and falling and weeping and sort of and singing and just
or trying to sing.
Yeah.
Those are some high notes.
Those are some high notes, and you get to explore your falsetto a little bit with those. But I do the open mouth lip sync emoting, so I feel it in my chest without having to produce the sound out of my mouth. Yeah, that's so fair. It's pantomime and miming at the same time.
Driving down the highway.
If you were driving down beside me on the way here today, as I spun the album again, you would have seen me moving and breathing and sort of, I looked like imagine Pavarotti on stage with no sound but driving. That was me.
So air tenor.
Air tenor. Yeah. Air tenor. Exactly. With weeping. Yeah.
Well, yeah. That track, I am with you on the emotional scale of it. To me, I've often felt like it's so primal.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I'm listening to a life, birth, living, and then dying, just the way it's all shaped, and how it always gets the hook in me too.
Yeah.
But the part about that track that really speaks to me a lot these days is how it's like the desire to connect, the desire to be heard, so because of that primal element, right? Just crying out, right. Singing out. And like the fact that it's called The Great Gig in the Sky is really interesting to me, because what it says to me too is that crying out is for all things.
Yeah.
It's not bound to human beings. It seems to be so much more expansive than that. And I think that's largely due to the vocal part itself.
Yeah.
But the shape of it seems to echo like the framework of the arc of life. Just how it builds, and then it lives and it breathes, and then it just whimpers off. It's an amazing, it's profound track.
It's a profound track at exactly the right juncture in that journey. You know, like that, like the
between time and money.
Exactly.
Between time and money is the essence of life.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing else. The quality I like most about Dark Side of the Moon for me is I love meditation in terms of not meditating, but like I love thought. I love journey through thought. And when as soon as that cues up, as soon as the album cues up, and you get this sort of the introduction, which sort of sets the pace, right?
Yeah.
And you have all those little elements that are collage that are part of future parts of the album, right? It's almost like
it's an overture.
An overture, exactly.
It is very much an overture.
It just enough to sort of like, with drama to sort of present it all as it sort of swells up, and then boom, you're into the the running of the next track after that little intro. it's all meditative for me. The trip is just, where's this going to take me?
I love what you're saying, because I've been pondering this ever since we decided we're going to do Dark Side of the Moon.
Okay.
And the word came to me. My experience of Dark Side of the Moon is that it's a lullaby. The whole thing, even money,
Yeah.
even time, no matter how edgy or intense the music gets, it really doesn't. It sustains this lullaby aesthetic.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's Dark Side of the Moon, right? The symbolism of the moon. Like even when we're talking, we've mentioned before about how, Dark Side of the Moon would be played at night.
Yeah.
But it's this lullaby factor. I was about to say movie, interesting. The whole album, it just sways back and forth. It's very soothing. And I don't know how intentional that was. But what the part about it that really blows my mind when I think about that now is how all the things that are being presented to you lyrically should actually really be upsetting. But the lullaby presentation, delicate hands, the gentle gesture of being rocked and held, I really feel that from that album, even in that Great Gig in the Sky track.
Yeah.
And so you talk about a meditative thought journey. For me, I find Dark Side of the Moon is one of the albums that is very visceral as well, which I imagine you've brought up in another way. But the lullaby, when I felt that idea, I was like, yes, the album is a lullaby to me. So why would I settle for hearing only money? I want my full embrace. I want to be rocked and swayed through that journey.
Right. Well, because money is not Dark Side of the Moon.
No,
right?
it's not.
It's Dark Side of the Moon as an experience, as an album, is its own thing.
Yeah.
And there's you when you talk about lullaby, I think of the idea of cradling.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
And part of that, I think, comes from sort of the ebb and flow of this, we'll call it the musical motifs and cycles, right? That are part of that.
Cycles. That's a great word for it. Yeah.
And then the other part of that comes with this really adept command of dynamic, and that that has that cradling, sort of wind moving through trees feel to it, so that when you surrender yourself to the experience of taking whatever the journey is, when you cue up the album, the music, if you allow it to happen, if you have the time and space for it, the music will find its way to sort of encapsulate you as the listener.
Yes.
And you are in its sway, right?
Yeah.
And I totally get the lullaby element of it, and I think that on its own would be like an hour or 2 hour discussion, especially as it relates to nighttime listening.
Yeah,
because I've probably listened to this album 90% of the time at night.
Yep.
And in my bed, and I've probably fallen asleep to this album 150 times. Maybe I might have listened to this album 1,000 times. Yeah, maybe in my life. Yeah. But that going and surrendering to sort of waking, sort of semi-awake dream state that you sort of get when you can kind of fall into an album. It becomes a physical experience in that way for me, and visceral. I think a lullaby is a physical experience.
And and that was why, for me, that understanding was, I've come to this point to have that understanding of something I've experienced many times, and I think what you mentioned before about cycles, the moon symbolism, which is really fascinating, because the moon does not have a dark side.
Mm-hmm.
The entire moon is graced with darkness and light because the moon makes one orbit around the Earth, and in the same time it makes that orbit, it does one full rotation. And that's why it always presents the same side to us.
Right.
And that's not an uncommon thing. There are a number of other moons, at least in our solar system, that do that. But it's fascinating when because of my interest in astronomy, this happened a number of years ago where I made this little realization, is that if he says, I'll see you on the dark side of the moon, where is that?
Yeah.
And granted, if we are there together on that space, in that place on the moon where it's dark, if we wait a little bit longer, we're going to see light. So the whole reference you made to cycles, I mean, even the way the tracks are balanced are incredibly lunar because of, there's that spatial sense of reverb.
Yeah.
That the tempos are slow.
Yeah.
And that all of the tracks are lighted into one another.
Yeah.
And then on top of it all, it's not strictly A-B throughout the album, but it's almost that every other track is instrumental.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was pondering this a bit, it made me consider how I realized that for me, those instrumental tracks are highly reflective.
Yeah.
We've just sung to you about something that's hardcore to hear about, whether it's about having to run to survive through life. You're compared to being like a rabbit, or it's about the suffering that it's incurred by our proclivity to deal with money and our concepts of time. So we're going to give you this instrumental moment to just swallow, just to take that in, to digest it.
Yeah.
And get ready for the next thing.
Yeah.
And how lyrically, I mean, the number of themes that are in this album, Syd Barrett, industrialization, love, connection. Like, there's just so much. How could you encapsulate that all? Well, what you do is you pick a single symbol that will hold it all, and it's the moon.
Right.
So going back to that lullaby aspect, sweetie, these are things in the world, but keep going.
Yeah.
It's okay,
Yeah.
Yeah, like I feel sometimes. You mentioned about the cradling, which is right on spot.
Yeah.
But I think I am also reminded of like the feeling of like a knitted Afghan.
Yeah.
That is, it's the cradling Afghan.
Yeah.
And it just comes around you. And I think too that the other part that makes the album so profound for me is the equanimity of sound sources and instruments. There was no manual to do this, what they did. And again, there's always, there was that thing about how Alan Parsons happened to have all those recordings.
Right, he had access to them.
He had
yeah,
access to that.
Yeah.
So, this is things that happened in, the chaos of life. But to start an album with an overture of recorded sounds, and, it's so well balanced to say that, overtures were traditionally music, right? But here we have an overture of sound sources to get you going, to get you into the mood of the album.
Well, that's for that. That's one of the, I hesitate to use the word genius, but that is one of the genius elements of that, because recognizing that all these other songs and all could be, but just by pulling those references out of those songs, like those alternate, little snippets that was the overture.
Yeah.
Because that, they became, by being embedded in the songs themselves, became, representative of the whole song. And so you get this amazing, sort of thing where just some little vocalization or a little snippet of a conversation is representative of a whole song section or a whole, and it's not as if, I mean, there's elements of cut up there, right? And sort of cut up and collage going back to the beats. It's not new.
Yes.
But so, and within British radio and radio drama, they had some real technical mastery of the use of that kind of stuff. So I don't think it wouldn't have been that revolutionary of an idea to a degree, but to be able to encapsulate it representatively within that as an overture and have just those isolated elements sort of swell up and be so completely representative at the same time, that's an amazing thing, and I think you're right to point that out. How novel that was,
it's the way that it was done.
The way it was done, not just that it was done, but the way.
And there was, I mean, the origins of using sound sources to create music go back to musique concrète in the 40s.
Right.
So it's not like they were first in doing that, but I agree with you in how they did it. It was very, just beautifully done. And the word I keep coming back to, and I'm not totally sure why, but it's patience. There's an incredible patience about that. And I suppose that factors into the mood and the pace of the album. But if I go back to the moon symbolism, that overture encapsulates all of it, right? It's all there. It all coexists. And I wonder if that's also part of what is so compelling about not only Dark Side of the Moon, but I think other Pink Floyd albums, is how they're able to fold things into one another and then present this whole entity out of that. So again, like I mentioned, there's these very, you could do concept albums on just each one of the areas they touch on, mental health.
Yeah.
You could, of course, and then there are people who have, but to put all that together, and like you were saying, put that in the overture like that, it is, I don't know, maybe the mesmerism of it could be of our youth, maybe to a certain degree. There's that, the nostalgia factor. But I'm getting ready for this. I listened to it about 3 times.
Yeah.
And I still at moments have my mouth dropped open with just wow. I've listened to this so many times and I'm still captivated by it. And I even took the time to go back and re-listen to something that I had maybe really spent time on. And I found myself reflecting on the moon symbolism and how, it's such a prominent component of our lives, but we never really pay a lot of attention to it.
Sure.
And I think that this album, with its delicate hands and with its lullaby quality, is also saying, you really need to listen to this.
Yeah.
Really need to listen to this. And remember how it all goes together.
Sure.
Right? Because you know how we talk about how I can't just, if you put on time, you're starting me too late. And then you're going to say that's the only song.
Yeah.
So in the same respect, I think that, again, I don't know how intentional this is, but for me, Dark Side of the Moon is like a reminder of how nuanced life is, how everything is connected, how relationship just is so multifaceted and multifunctional. And whenever you get really focused on something, you're not.
Right.
The only way you're able to focus on something is because everything else is doing what it does.
I want to jump on a word you used that you said.
Okay.
You said mesmerism.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I think that that is actually a profound observation on that intro, because if you watch those, you watch A Man Called Ravine, you watch The Hypnotist, for any international listener, Google A Man Called Ravine. You watch any hypnotist, right?
Yes.
And they have this device that they use to induce the hypnosis and there's often an element of sort of like swell and quickness to it, right? Like there's this it's not I'm going to lull you over a long time into a hypnotic thing. There's a sort of quickness to the hypnotic inducement.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what's happening in that intro there. I think as a device that's a sort of replicates a kind of setting you a mesmerism. It's the engagement of that element of now you're in. You know?
And to add to that, I would say it's also got that then kind of shamanic, psychedelic aspect to it, so that you go into the dive quickly and then the dive slows down.
Yeah.
Right? You have to cross that threshold. So the album was made in an era, around that era of psychedelic art, maybe on the kind of the end of it.
Yeah.
So again, not really sure if that's what they were intending to do, but I'm with you there on how that's what the album does, because you just immediately are like, and even how Breathe starts, it's like a it is like a dive.
Well, and I like the breath that happens in the music before the word breathe comes out. Like you those that shamanistic sort of setting you up, it's teeing you up. As that sort of happens, it also then it's planted those elements in your brain. So when they come around in the songs, you've already got the door primed for it, right? It's part of the trip. Like, in 20 seconds you heard the album, but you didn't know it.
Just like the first track and the last track of Animals.
Just like the first and last track of Animals, yeah.
But I think it's important to distinguish the difference between what kind of magic, because mesmerism can get, just like the word magic gets often associated to deception and misdirection, which is not, I think, at all a quality of the album.
Right. I think mesmerism leading to hypnotic, which is then leading to psychedelic, which is leading to trip and journey. So exactly. We're on the same page there.
Totally.
So it's not a smoke and mirrors journey.
Yeah, not at all. And I didn't think you meant that.
Yeah.
But to add to all of that is how it starts with a heartbeat.
Yeah.
And that is a very insightful observation of the conflict, I think, that human beings may delve into with the individual and the species, right? And again, that word cycles that you mentioned comes up for me. So to start with the heartbeat means it initiates it as being very personal and within you.
It's embodied.
It's embodied. And then all of a sudden there's all these other sounds that bring that heartbeat out beyond itself.
Yeah.
And then there's the breath. And then breathe. Yeah.
So, which is it is the first thing you do when you sort of claim life, when you're born. That breath, right?
Well, your heart's already womb.
Yeah, but your heart's already but yes.
There's
political political implications as well. And No positions are being advocated or prioritized over others here. But your heart is beating in the womb, right?
Yeah.
And that's almost like a prelude to life, right?
Yeah.
Where life, corporeal life, in our existential crisis of living, the one that the struggle happens on that first breath.
Yeah.
When you wake up into the world with a breath and and a cry,
Yeah.
and like, what the hell?
Which could bring us right back to Great Gig in the Sky.
Yeah.
That cry.
Yeah.
I'm here. Can
Yeah.
you hear me? Can you see me? What the heck is going on? How do I manage this? Yeah.
It's a primal cry that harkens backwards to the first cry.
Yeah.
It's a lament
Yeah.
for what has gone on and what is going to be happening. As you're going through the passages. Passages is another interesting word to use. I thought of passenger as well. I like when back to the idea of trip and going on this journey and being cradled through this journey in body and mind. The album has, I'm going through passages as a passenger on this. I'm embodied in the experience of it. I'm creating experience. My mind is doing the same psychedelic ink blotter creation that the backdrop did in the concerts, say, whatever Jefferson Airplane was doing
Right.
back in the day. Like, my mind is doing that while I'm listening to this.
Right.
And I think it's important to note that this music for Dark Side was written and conceived as through performance, that it was toured before
Yes.
it was recorded.
Yeah.
And so that the music as a experience, as a performance aesthetic, as an experience, I understand the shape of those songs, and I understand the sort of transitions of those songs, knowing that lyrically the themes evolved and changed.
Yeah,
but the
that's what I
music
heard.
of them sort of was sort of, very purposeful to facilitate sort of a audience journey with performance. So the idea of performance and audience journey is embodied in the very way that music was created.
Yeah. Which is an interesting for the genre.
Yeah.
That what people would be expecting of rock music at that time. Why would I go to an arena or a concert setting to be swayed and lulled into this lullaby journey? I mean, it's very innovative in a performance sense, because it actually sounds more like a studio album.
Sure.
Like made in the studio. We got to find a way to put all this together. It actually, for a while, that's what I thought it was. Early on, I thought, oh yeah, this is a studio album. And it was actually something that was created by performance.
And I think I thought the same thing. I was surprised to find out that it wasn't just, I thought it was studio wizardry, that four guys and a bunch of engineers descend on the Abbey Road, and like scientists with a master vision of something, put together this album. And I think that if it developed and road tested and through performance and through this intimate understanding of the give and take of energy that would have come from an audience.
Yes.
I got shaping the music as it evolved over time as a performance piece. I got to think that embodied within the music something of that energy, like some formulaic understanding of human, I think they really understood the effect of the music on that audience. And I think that the authenticity, the humanness of that, like is embodied in the music itself. And then when you took that back to the studio, like A Great Gig in the Sky, a good example, there was no singing during that period,
it was
right?
Just, it was just the piano and drums and
apparently Bible verses.
Oh, that I didn't know.
Yeah, or something, again.
They put something in there.
They put something in there, and, but the music, I think, is relatively the same. I think, and so, like this thing that seems so purposefully married with this vocalization and this piece of music, to know that happened because someone made a phone call and said, we got to get a girl in here because, the Stones had, Mary Clayton, and, and Zeppelin had Sandy Denny,
right?
Like it's our turn, right? And that's, it would have been right after those. And, so a phone call was made and someone came in and apparently she sang words in the beginning and they had to tell her.
That's interesting because what I found was that the first thing she did though is it sounded too sexual.
Yeah.
Like it's like orgasmic. And then they asked her to do it again. And then the next take, I can't remember what they had said, but she just sang that.
Right. It's out there in the scholarship. So anyone that wants to go find the nuances of all that is there. But it really interesting that was something that came after.
And I think that in any of the processes that I've read about the creation of albums, but I think this goes across the board with creativity and that is that there's chaos embedded in the order that we so deeply seem to want to not only find but control. And so as much as we can sit here and or if we could go ahead with all those scholarly articles, we would still find moments of that's just how it happened.
Yeah.
There isn't a formula. There isn't a formula you can reproduce to make another album, as in, if you want to say, as incredible as Dark Side of the Moon. There's that chaos, that randomness of life where things come together and you're kind of amazed.
Well, and the experience of it is liminal in the sense that that the whole is greater, or at least it's different than the sum of its parts. So as we can look at the parts, but those parts don't define the experience. The experience came in the sum of everything, and exactly. What happened uniquely, whatever the magic of that experiential element of those things combined are. And I think part of why it's great art is that, just from our own conversation here, we're re-experiencing that album in different ways every time we listen, not just because we're bringing something different to it, because that, of course, would be true to anything we listen to, but because there's just so much richness and possibility there, that there's something very, very special about that album, and that album as an experience. It's not a song, just like the Dark Side of the Moon isn't just the songs, right? It's in the same way. It's not just the components of the songs. It's everything packaged together, played together, and experienced together.
Which in itself comes back to that moon symbolism, right? That, like I was mentioning before about how the rotation and it's deceptive, how you just see one side, but actually that's not how it's working. That's not how it's moving.
No.
But it just looks like that.
Yeah.
And then from our position on the earth, we're granted these, we call them synchronicities when they seem to be very special, like eclipses, right? Lunar eclipse, whenever there's a full moon or there's a new moon, those are, considered to be well, I don't, maybe considered isn't the right word, but we tend to reflect more on those than the processes that move in between those moments.
Right.
Just like the tracks on the album, there's everything just slides into the next song, slides into the next track. And I think that the moon symbolism and just watching the process of the moon, the cycles of the moon, and then when you're conceiving of this album and how the creation of this album, we don't get to see all of it. We don't get to know all of it. Just like the moon's going to pass, the rest of the earth gets to see it. Wherever we are, we get to see what we're going to see. And just like with the album, we get to see what we're going to see. But we know that there's more going on, that there was more going on. And I think that understanding of not only this album itself, but any creative act, that's really big.
Yeah.
Maybe it might seem at times like it's easy. It's not a big deal because you don't have to think about it. But it's amazing when you venture when you have a creative vision, and like what happened with, the sound sources of clocks in that Alan Parsons had.
Yeah.
What was the feeling that any one of them had where we need to find this, and then there it was. Kind of like Syd Barrett showing up during Wish You Were Here.
Right.
Where he
just appeared.
He just appeared.
Yeah.
And, they're making this whole album about him. Right? So, yeah. And even, again, I'm really drawn into your use of the word cycles. Because we, again, that desire to work with patterns and order. What is the whole cycle? What is the whole cycle?
Yeah.
How did they make this album? Well, you're not going to be able to grasp all of it. So then the whole thing about your own experience, how deeply you go into it and what it is for you, is again, I'm not going to be able to tell David Gilmour about it, I think. I'd like to.
Well, that's the trap, right? Talking about any of these things that we'll talk about over time, but this album in particular is to try and come up with a factual, sort of data-driven. Here's this album. Like when you say there's more going on, right? And we're talking about the dark side of the moon that we don't see. But we know there's more going on back there. It is about possibility. It's an explicit acknowledgement of everything beyond, and so we're not going to find the answer. The answer isn't in compiling a list of data points on this album, right? Yeah. And as fascinating as all that stuff is, and I've geeked out on it in my time,
and it does have its advantages for sure.
Oh yeah, and geeking out on it will enrich your experience of it.
Yeah.
I caution anyone that gets too hung up on trying to find the answer in that. And you have to, I think you have to acknowledge the mystery. You have to, the album is talking about life in its pains and pleasures and in its confusion.
Yeah.
And it's taking you from cradle to grave. It's an album in 2 parts, right? And it ends with sort of it ends very religiously. It sort of has this triumphant kind of religious sort of thematic ending in musically, but that with all the challenging existential elements of the journey that's depicted through that, there's still, like you talk about the lullaby and the cradling, and it's still it's still got to bring you through, and you still got to come out on the other side of that, right? You still have to, like when you walk away from this album, you're not destroyed, although you may have had a tough journey.
Right.
You're not, I'm never getting on that journey again, right? And you shouldn't be, oh, I've got that figured out, done. Like here's my, like, or, I'm sure there's a guy, I'm sure there's people that punch that ticket and say, took the trip, there's the t-shirt.
Well, I know that I've done that back in the day with saying, well, there's not a lot of, not this particular album, but some other music where I've said, yeah, it doesn't meet my, guitar shredding bar here.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't have, the drumming isn't so great and all of that. And so, that idea of looking at how things are put together, the relationships, is very different than saying what should be there, what isn't there, why is it there, get it out of there.
Yeah.
It's very different. And I think that this is an aside, but I think that is an interesting way to conceive of life.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
That idea of disposability, right? I don't need this anymore, or it's not worth anything, so I'm going to just throw it away. And I think actually that comes up in Dark Side of the Moon. Because if you are talking about a problem or an issue that needs to be solved, you need to embrace it as well.
Yeah.
There needs to be some degree of, okay, I will engage with this closely. That's how you get to know it.
Yeah.
But then in that engagement, you actually probably don't know where you'll end up. Unless you hold on to that idea of it needs to be cast aside. But in Dark Side of the Moon, the lyrical elements, I find they do that for me.
Yeah.
Where it sometimes if I think about certain lines, they're not as straightforward as I thought they were maybe 10 years ago.
Okay.
They become a little bit more like even that idea, I'll see you on the dark side of the moon.
Sure.
Well, wait a minute. Where is the dark side of the moon?
Right.
Now, tomorrow, the day after. It's moving all the time.
Right. And that's the poetry of that, and that again comes from, there's nothing wrong with having a fairly specific journey through the album and coming out and saying at one point in time, oh, I know what you mean there. You mean death. I'll see you when we die. That's what that means. And it's like, okay, that sure. If that's what that's what that can mean for you, if you want that to mean for you. But the poetry of it, it allows for a whole lot more than that, obviously. And I, I'll see you on the dark side of the moon. That's a really ambiguous kind of idea, like it's one to just kind of imbibe with, what's the right word there? I'm not even sure. It's one to kind of take into your mouth.
Right.
Like
it's a lozenge.
It's
a thought lozenge.
It's a thought lozenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because for a while ago,
yeah,
I thought that I'll see you on the dark side of the moon was specifically referencing Barrett.
Yeah.
I'll see you in your dark place.
Right.
But then, well, wait a minute. What about all that other stuff?
Right.
Is that also maybe speaking about that's where we all are, or we spend our time?
Right.
Is on the dark side of the moon. We don't give ourselves enough time on the parts that receive light. Yeah, like there's just so much to that.
Yeah, I think one of the traps with a lot of Pink Floyd stuff is getting too specific, and particularly when people get really focused on Barrett. And there's people. People love to talk about Sid, right? And I can remember guys that were Sidophiles, that fetishized, everything to do with him.
I've never met these people.
West Wally, 1984. There were a few.
Maybe that was a person who was wearing that shirt I saw.
Yeah,
Maybe that was
Wally
one of them.
Exchange. Yeah, was it?
No, it was actually at school.
Oh, okay. It was. Joël and I both went to the same junior high, but about 4 years apart. Yeah.
3 years apart.
So there's my echoes of my experiences there were still reverberating around the hall.
For all I know,
was
I
there.
actually was in all your lockers.
You
For all I know.
That's right.
Whose stuff is this?
What? Who wrote that? Yeah. People get very focused on Sid and try to make a lot of very definitive pronouncements about references and meaning and stuff, and get very focused. And I always looked at that stuff as kind of loose, right?
Yeah.
Because if you've dealt with mental illness, mental illness is anything but defined. It's loose. It's human. It's confusing. It's confusing. Your own relationship with someone who has and is suffering from that is itself a flux.
Yeah. Yeah.
So whatever illusions or references have to exist within this sort of almost like an existential poetry that is sort of
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're definitely part of those references for sure. But they're so much more than
Which is, I think, for myself, I greatly appreciate that about their lyrics, because I didn't really start caring about lyrics until someone schooled me on lyrics, and the example was Pink Floyd.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
wow.
You need to learn about lyrics. Like, oh really? Yeah. Read these lyrics. Wow.
What was
It was Dark Side of the Moon.
It was wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was Dark Side of the Moon, and it was it wasn't Eclipse. It was Brain Damage. Brain Damage. Yeah, it was Brain Damage. So yeah, the lyricism, I agree with you. And then I think that reflects back to just their sound palette itself.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's it's open, it's free. I speculate that my first listening of Dark Side of the Moon, the reason why it grabbed me but I couldn't really understand it, was because of that equanimity, that poetry that is in the lyrics and is in the music. It's so open. What do I hold on to here? What do I grasp onto? What is happening? And which, again, specifically with Dark Side of the Moon, I think that's also another element. Maybe it's an element of all of Pink Floyd's work. What's going on? What are we really going after, and why are we going after that, or why are we so entranced or passionate about these things? And I wonder if too that's why a lot of the themes that for myself come up when I listen to Pink Floyd is about connecting with human beings, other human beings, and the challenges of that, and the needs of that. Yeah.
I wonder, looking at today and how people are playing music and experiencing music, and something like Dark Side of the Moon, which had the statistic of being on the album sales charts for this enormously decades long period of time. I would be curious of a couple of things. I'd be curious of any data on streaming services on like how people are listening to Dark Side of the Moon. Like, are they streaming Dark Side of the Moon? Are they playing money?
Yeah.
Like how is it being consumed today? And just to try to connect that to the poetry of those words, the language and the poetic language that's part of Dark Side, you have to kind of you have to swim in it a bit to kind of get it or to hear it even. Like it's not in your face. It's
Right.
not, it's wet, right? And Gilmour's voice when he's singing is this beautiful, angelic, gentle voice. There's this lovely
Yeah.
choir in the background. And like you pointed out, you know, you're singing, that's singing some tough stuff, some tough existential, you know, truths of, you know, painful things to be wrestling with from that. But it's not dry and in your face where the meaning is up front and that's the deliverable, right?
Yeah.
It's much more subtle than that, and it's much more challenging. And I think you get that. I think you only get that by swimming it with it and swimming into it and sort of, you know, allowing it to sort of wash over you and maybe the experience of holding the lyric sheet, you know, can you hear the words that are being spoken? I hear, you know, sometimes the phrases are a little, you know, too, you know, sort of, they disappear into themselves.
Right.
So like, you know, you have to really pull them out, or you need an assist to pull them out.
Right.
And you know, that comes from repeated journeys, repeated experience and familiarity. And you attune your ear to being to pull more and more out. So,
Right.
you know, as one of the things through all our discussions that we'll hopefully have is to try and communicate how vital or how I don't want to prejudice just with my opinion, but how important it is to listen to music as an experience. You know, like the experience of a concept album requires you to experience the concept album. You have to play it. You have to, you know, sort of make time for it. You have to have a space to play it in. And I don't want to use the word consume because it's got loaded implications. But
Right.
you know, you need a place to have it happen, and it has to happen over time. It doesn't, you know, it can't happen without listening to it as a piece. So, you know, I don't know how people experience this now.
Yeah.
I don't know how this is experienced. And I don't know how you experience those lyrics if you can't pull out a lyric sheet and listen to it. Or if you're not looking at the pyramid, you know, or the pictures on the inner sleeves, or the cards that came with it, you know, like all those things add, you know, in books, it's the paratext, right? It's the, right. So, but they all contribute to the experiential element of the text of the book. So, you know, even the poetry of it, you know, where or how can that be experienced right now outside of just knowing what the words are? You know, I'm a little less clear on my own thoughts on this, like just sort of because like you initially, although I'm a word guy, that's not my first go-to for any song. And
Right.
I tend to go music first.
Right.
But the words and the poetry of it are things that I explore sort of in parallel or as part of a different process that at some point I marry up to maybe the easier process
Right.
that is the experience of the music.
Yeah.
I've got things to say about that, but I don't have the formulated thoughts to sort of really get to it.
Well, what you just said really makes me reflect on how you experience music. I know that, you know, we have seen some massive changes in just the physical nature of the creation and experience of music.
Mm.
Even the simplest consideration, like there's an A side and a B side to an album. When you look at how it's laid out, Money is the first song on the B side. Great Gig in the Sky was the last song on the A side. So you'd put on that record, and when you got to the end of the Great Gig, you had to get up and flip that record. And it sounds, on the one hand, maybe it sounds like, yeah, that's what they did back in the day. It's flipping a record's not a big deal.
Right.
But maybe it is. Maybe it really is. Maybe it is a big deal to pull out the album sleeve. And that sound, that beautiful sound of paper and cardboard that's, got that nice finish on it. And then you drop the album on it. And then you just put it on. You put it on the turntable. All of that stuff. Maybe that is a part of the sounds of Dark Side of the Moon too.
Mm-hmm.
At least it is for me a little bit. Although the first time I heard it was on a cassette. But then again, it was out of the tech. The tech played a role in how I experienced that music. And right now, the way music is being experienced, every day I think about it. Every day I think about, what am I doing? Why is it this way? Could it be another way? And what I keep coming back to is, how are people going to experience this? And in other conversations we've mentioned before, it's not like I want to control that, because I can't. I'm open to the mystery of, experience.
Right.
But there's something to be said for how the technology that we have and how we use it is as much a part of what we're listening to. You can't separate the two. You can't separate them. I mean, there was that whole process when things were going digital and things weren't quite loud enough. And then all of a sudden one day, everything was pretty loud again. Like it was loud. Not again, it was loud. But before, if I had for a short period of time, I had 2 albums of 90125. One was the one I uploaded, and one was the one I downloaded, and the volume was different. So the one I downloaded had been remastered a little bit, and they'd added a few dB to it. And for a little while, I remember kind of feeling like those albums were from different, they weren't the same album, just because of the volume. Mm-hmm. It was very peculiar, actually. I thought, oh, that's the old one. This is the new one, just because of how loud it was. And so, yeah, I too have a lot of places I could go to with this.
Yeah.
I actually feel at times that I don't really know what to say about it to a certain degree. And it's not because I feel bad about any of it. It's just because I feel like it's really obvious that it does affect. Like whenever, I had to learn Dark Side of the Moon largely by listening to the album and picking up my guitar and figuring it out. Mm-hmm. And now, don't have to do that. Now, am I giving the younger generation a hard time? Not at all. Use that stuff.
Yeah.
There's other things that it's going to take people to. That's great. But there is a different intimacy to learning music when all you have is your ears and the guitar strings that are so old, they go out of tune so easily, and your fingers hurt. I just got to find this chord before I go to bed tonight. Play it again, 100th time.
Yeah.
What is that chord? What's that lick? So for me, at least, and I imagine maybe for you, that the mechanics of playing music has also been largely informed by just listening, how the music is, whether it's cassettes or albums or CDs, because that naturally includes how the other stuff came with it, all the other bells and whistles. Here's the score to Dark Side of the Moon. Right.
Well, that's interesting because, yeah, without question, when I listen to Time, I not only can I scat the solo, but I can finger the solo as I listen, like my body is moving unconsciously as I'm as I'm playing that. And how and why is that happening? It's not because I'm an air guitar player. It's because, like you said, you've dropped the needle or you rewound the cassette on that thing hundreds of times.
Yeah.
And so I'm somehow married into that. Like I'm vested into that. From a musician standpoint. Does my musical appreciation of that, it's got to be somewhat a function of that. It's got to be attached to that. But we jumped over it a little bit in this. We weren't sure. And I think we're still not 100% sure. Is this episode 1? As we talk about Dark Side of the Moon, but we're talking about concept albums, and that the operant word there that is album, right? And what is an album? Because what's a concept album?
Yes.
What's an album? And, how does a concept album differ from an album, or how is a concept album uniquely a concept album as an album? Yeah. It's a thing, right? It's a thing that has,
it's a labyrinth inside an enigma.
Well, it's 2 sides or 4 sides, right?
Yeah.
And so if it's 2 sides, is it a 2-act play,
right?
With an intermission? Is it 2 quick movements and then 2 concluding movements with an intermission?
Yeah.
Is it as a double album? Now we've got 4 sides, but is the first album really just one side? In its conceptual arc, is the second album a second side? As you get into double albums, in concept albums, you're playing. That second album is usually played less than that first album. Or if there's some standout moment that's on the second album,
right?
Then that may be reversed, right? But as time ticks on in the experience of listening to some, you drop off, like your very first listen.
Yeah.
Did you don't think
Not
you got
sure
to the
why,
end?
but
Not sure why.
No, I know
right?
I didn't.
Right.
I just don't know why.
Yeah. So, I'm sure a lot of people have started listening to Dark Side of the Moon. Then they've listened to the whole thing,
Right.
And the first change, like you mechanically, the environment and the process, the preparation to listen. If it's vinyl, you're not in a car. It's vinyl.
Right.
Like you have to have some sort of stable environment with a turntable that's not going to be bouncing or.
I'm sure there's a car like that somewhere.
But you've got to drop the needle.
Yeah.
Right. And you have that, 20 minutes?
Yeah.
That first, you're kind of queued up for a period of time. I'm going to be in the chair for 20 minutes. I can do a side. You're prompted at some point to change, to flip over to the second side. Right. And you have a choice. Do I got time? Have I pre-planned this trip? So I've got, or am I jumping off right here? Cassettes were similar, not as, maybe not as demanding. You drop your cassette in, and it gets to the end, and you go over and you flip it over. That changed when auto reverse happened, right?
Right.
So there came a point in time, after we were all used to having to go flip the cassette. That auto reverse happened. So, it made that choice for you, and you were either ready for it and that was part of your trip, or you were like, oh shit, you stop it. Right. Yeah. I'm going to stop it. Yeah. But this sort of commitment to the experience, or queuing up the experience, or preparation, and sort of like you had to be somewhat prepared to listen to that album and to go on whatever that trip is, or to sort of, consume it as an experience. Is there a point where it's not the experience of the album? Like, if you play just side one of Dark Side, what is that? What is that? Is that a cheat? Is that does that not count?
I don't know if I'd say it doesn't count. Because I think there's a lot of reasons why that might happen. I'm an example.
Yeah.
But I think that the word that we've used, well, you've used it quite a bit, and I've used it a bit, is journey. And I'm someone who values greatly art, but art doesn't supersede the art of living. So any reason why someone would stop listening to something, I can't really say that it's a uniform declaration of their character or phenomena itself. However, I think that going on a journey that is, you already know ahead of time that there are going to be things asked of you that you probably don't want to do, or you're less inclined to do. In my life experience, those have always given me a lot, even if the digestion of that was years later. I think going back to the specific theme of this episode, which is Dark Side of the Moon, I think actually Dark Side of the Moon reflects that quite literally. I'll meet you on the dark side of the moon. It's okay. It's really okay. I'll do that with you. And that's the part that right now kind of just blossomed up as you were speaking, is it's the with part. I'll do this with you.
Right.
So you go listen to an album, you go on a journey of an album. Who are you taking with you? Who is there? Right? So there's a possibility of being in a concert hall and there's lots of people there. But since we've been talking a lot more about the intimacy of the tech, right? The headphones or whatever you put on that album, you listen to it. I sometimes feel that you don't actually ever listen to music by yourself because you didn't make that music. You didn't build that technology, all of that. And I think journeys like that are not alone. I remember having a conversation with someone some time ago talking about listening to music when we were young. And I was talking about how I listened to a lot of music, different types of music when I was a kid. I was really fascinated about it. And one of the things that I remember that was I find particularly interesting about myself is that I remember the moment I actually wanted to study music theory, but I didn't know that that's what it was called, because I had listened to some classical music. I think it was Debussy.
Okay.
Pretty sure it was Debussy. And then I put on Take 5, Dave Brubeck.
Okay.
And I went from listening to a full orchestra, which at that time I didn't really completely understand how it worked. And then I went listening to Dave Brubeck, which was trio.
Yeah.
No, it was a quartet. Because there's the bass, piano, drums, and the horn.
Okay.
So it was a quartet, I believe. And I remember thinking, why do both of these things work? How is it that you can have all of these musicians and it all works together? And then how is it that you can have 4 people together and it works just as well? I don't feel like anything's missing. I'm not sitting here listening to Dave Brubeck thinking, where are the strings? And I wasn't listening to Debussy thinking about, where's the jazz?
Yeah.
I didn't do that. These things both work. They really work. And so the idea of the journey and going on that journey and the questions that come up with that journey and how that informs your life, you can't quantify it. You can't qualify it, right? You can you get to reflect on it, hopefully for a good amount of time, and it doesn't take you down into some dark places you can't get out of, potentially. But I never asked myself, there's got to be a better way to listen to music. This album stuff doesn't make sense. I just went along with it. This is how I listen to music right now. I wasn't conceiving of CDs or streaming, right? I was thinking about what I was listening to. I was focused on what I was listening to. But now when I think about that journey as we're talking about it, it is very much embedded with how we listen to it.
Yeah.
You can't separate them.
I liked what you said when you referenced, the See You on the Dark Side of the Moon, as you related that to the journey. That's the end, right? The end of the album, and he's talking about the journey as if it hasn't started yet, right?
That's very perceptive.
So,
yeah,
the question of like the experience of this album, as a meditation or as a hypnotic trip, or as a it's not about journey, it's about journeys. And it doesn't require, like, we're in that journey right now. It didn't require a specific listen event, and it was a journey related to a listen. Like it's so the journey that we're on with it and our relationship with it, continues long after the music is over. And you also talked about the interrelated music experience of listening and other music and other listening experiences. You're talking about the dialogic of music there, which is very much a Bakhtinian, or like a Bakhtin kind of theory of the interrelationship of utterances, and that every musical conversation, if we apply it to music, every note and every listen and every sort of history of listens and shared listens, are part of, are attached to the music.
Yes.
To every new utterance. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. Right. It exists as a history of all the things that were said and done before it, musically. Yes. So, the journey that is part of this happened before, we ever picked up the album, and we're participating in a, sort of this innumerable, sort of streams of journey and experience touched on to this, that takes it out of time. It takes us out of our specific, linear time of dropping the needle and picking the needle up. It takes it out of our historical time that of when we got to the album and when we left it, and we're just part of this sort of body of experience in these liminal spaces that are happening with us and without us. It's a sea. It's and back to the dark side of the moon. It's alluded to. It's specifically referenced.
Yes.
It's what's happening on the other side. And there is a finiteness to our human lives. And part of the existential themes of this that are being wrestled with are the acknowledgement of and acceptance of that finiteness. But what's also offered is the magic that is in the metaphysical outside of the physical. It's the magic that's in the dreamscape, in behind, the senses of what we see and experience, while pointing out, don't forget to see and experience things. So like it's a very interesting dual theme of, hey, here you are alive, touch, feel, bleed, live. And then there's this dreamscape. There's this other space, this liminal space that is being held parallel, while you're being told this. So there's some very interesting, sophisticated duality of concrete and abstract, of finite and infinite, happening in this.
Which to me is reflected in the dark side of the moon as being embedded in one another. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we like to find bookends. We like to find the front cover and the back cover. But it's not that straightforward. Yet, as you pointed out, experience that.
Yeah.
Experience those patterns, experience those polarizations, experience, the pendulum swing, experience the cycles, and go on with reflect at the same time.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really kind of, I find it quite beautiful to think that I don't think I'll ever really have my finger down on Dark Side of the Moon. I feel very grateful for that.
Well, and that would have been my question, but I would have known that answer as well. It's like, I see myself in a lifelong relationship with this album, and I can only imagine 20 years from now, in whatever situation I'm in that time. Hopefully I still have hearing, but my engagement with this doesn't require the music anymore, or specifically, it's happening and will continue to happen. I think part of conversations about it is obviously it's part of sharing experience and having new experiences with it. The one sadness I have is right now I haven't had an opportunity to talk to too many young people about this album, or to hear of their experience of this album. So I am curious about that. I've got lots of nieces and nephews. I've got 15.
Right.
And I don't think any of them have listened to this album. And their ages 18 to 35. And so first part of me can hardly believe that I'm saying that, but it is true. They probably haven't listened to this album. And that disturbs me to some degree. But then I think of, the people that work for me, the younger people that work for me. I haven't talked about this album with anyone. Have they heard it? Like I'm hungry to hear fresh perspective and to see what kind of trip and journey people are taking with this now.
Well, hopefully this podcast will plant a seed.
Yeah. Plant a seed, and please share your experiences with Dark Side of the Moon. Yeah, send your self-addressed stamped envelope too, and your box top from your cereal, and we'll send you
on K-Tel Records.
Yeah. I was definitely pleased to talk about this album. I think it's one of the seminal, concept albums. Yeah. And so, it's of course we're going to talk about it. And then there's that part was like, but but it's so cliched to talk about it, but it's like, yeah, but it's not. Like, let's get over it. Let's it is what it is, and it's a pleasure to talk about it, because I like you, I find new things every time I listen to it. Just driving in the car on the way over today was again how dynamic it was. It was the sort of the loudness and softness of it, which is unheard of in a lot of music production today. You just don't get that kind of dynamic sensitivity, and that was just apparent in a crappy car journey with the album playing, and in the sweltering sun.
Well, referencing back to the whole lullaby and the cradling thing.
Yeah.
A hug is good. Doesn't matter where you are.
Yeah.
Hugs are good. So, yeah, I'm really glad that we started with Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah.
And mainly because of what you just said is, that's pretty seminal.
Yeah.
Is there any other way we could warm up? And really, no.
Yeah.
And again with you, like I said, I can't put my finger on this album. I will be revisiting it hopefully for many years to come, and I will find new things in it. And just to echo a couple things that we had said before, there are things about the aesthetics of this album that I think can inform anyone who enjoys music. Well, just the craft of it,
Yeah.
and the sensibility of it, and it is it's an album full of love for me. It just oozes this care and this tenderness and even kindness.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful to talk about it.
It makes me feel when I listen to it, and there's an authenticity that comes from really feeling something, and I generally feel good when I listen to it. But it has its traumatic emotional moments.
Yes.
But I feel good to express those and to feel those. I think it's important. And when I value music the most when it makes me feel, when it really, and if I'm open and allow it, to sort of find its way for me, I love that. I love to intellectualize about music, but I love to feel it.
Yeah.
And
agreed.
It's this album has feel all through it. My favorite part of our discussion was when you talked about Lullaby. I think that if there's a takeaway from this, I'm going to be thinking about that, because that I think is something that really excites me to sort of have that now in my sort of lexicon, or in my ability to sort of reflect back on this and experience it again in new form. I'll take that with me, because that's really, that's really cool. And Lullaby, again, if you look at Rockabye Baby, we're not singing happy things there, right?
Oh yeah.
That's not, Lullaby. So Lullaby has, it's not just a little kid song to make babies happy. It's like Lullaby has,
Ring Around the Rosie too.
Yeah. I mean, these things have some,
They're dark.
There's
some
some,
are really dark.
yeah, we can, there's some real rich humanness, that embraces and acknowledges the darkness. And thematically, the baby's still got to live and grow up, right?
Yeah.
We still got to go through this journey, right? But the journey's there. Embrace it, take it, live it, feel it, get through it,
And pay attention.
Yeah. Because you can sleep through it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's really, really gonna think about that. Gonna think about that for sure.
Me too.